Can you cook for a whole outfit? Wesley Tate didn't ask it like a question. He asked it like a test, the kind with only one right answer, and he'd already decided she couldn't pass it. Cora Howard looked at him. Not at the ground, not at her hands. Straight at him, with eyes that had seen harder men than Wesley Tate break before breakfast. "Yes," she said, "I can." He almost laughed, almost sent her back down that road with her 2 bags and her little girl and his regrets. Almost. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The notice went up on a Thursday. Wesley Tate nailed it to the post outside Callaway's general store himself, which told you something right there. Wesley didn't ask other men to carry his business. He wasn't the kind of foreman who sent someone else to do what his own hands could handle. The nail went in straight. The paper was plain. The words were few. Cook needed Ron Fork Ranch. Must handle a full outfit. 16 men, hard work, fair pay. Inquire with W. Tate. He stood back, looked at it once, and walked away. He didn't expect much. Cooks were hard to keep at Ron Fork. The last one lasted 11 days before he decided the pay wasn't worth the dust and the attitude of men who worked 14 hours and came to the table like they were owed something. The one before that drank. The one before that simply didn't show up one morning, and nobody ever found out why. Wesley had been feeding 16 ranch hands on his own cooking for 3 weeks by the time that notice went up. And if you'd tasted what he put on that table, you'd understand exactly how desperate the situation had become. She appeared on a Saturday. Wesley was out by the eastern fence line when his hand a wiry young man named Dill, who talked too much and noticed everything, came riding up fast. "Mr. Tate, there's a woman at the house." Wesley didn't look up from the post he was examining. What kind of woman? The kind that came about the cook notice. Dill paused. "She's got a child with her." Wesley looked up then. "How old's the child?" "Young, maybe 5 or 6. Wesley set down his tools. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there in the afternoon heat with the Texas wind pushing at his shirt, and he thought about all the reasons this was already a problem. "Send her away," he said. Dill didn't move. "She said she figured you'd say that." Then she figured right. She also said... Dill hesitated like a man who wasn't sure how to deliver a message he'd already half committed to. "She said to tell you she only needs 60 seconds. That's her exact words. 60 seconds. Wesley looked at him. Dill shrugged. "She didn't seem like the kind of woman who says things she doesn't mean, Mr. Tate." Wesley picked up his tools, set them in the box, and started walking back toward the house. Not because he was giving her 60 seconds. He told himself that clearly. He was going back to tell her directly face-to-face that Ron Fork Ranch was no place for a child, and the position had requirements she clearly couldn't meet, and he'd do it himself, because he wasn't the kind of man who sent another man to say the hard thing. That was what he told himself. Checked. She was standing in front of the house when he got there. 2 bags on the ground beside her. Not large bags. The kind of bags that told you this woman knew how to carry everything she needed in exactly the space she had, and she didn't waste room on anything that wouldn't earn its weight. The little girl stood beside her, holding her mother's hand, looking at the ranch with wide, serious eyes. Not frightened, just watching, learning. The way children do when they've learned early that the world doesn't slow down to explain itself to you. Cora Howard was 31 years old. She didn't look worn exactly. She looked used the way good tools look used, like every mark on them means something. Her hair was dark and pulled back practically. Her dress was clean, but not new. And her eyes were the thing Wesley noticed first and remembered longest. They didn't ask him for anything. That was unusual. In Wesley's experience, people who showed up needing something looked at you with want written all over their face. Cora Howard looked at him like she was doing him the favor of showing up at all, and she wasn't sure yet if he deserved it. "Mr. Tate," she said. "Mrs. Howard." Cora Howard. She didn't offer her hand. She stood straight. You posted a notice for a cook. I did. For a cook, not a family. She didn't flinch. My daughter is 6 years old, and she doesn't take up space that isn't hers. She won't be underfoot. She won't be a distraction. She'll be in whatever space you give us, and she'll be quiet, and she'll be good. This is a working ranch, Mrs. Howard. 16 hands, hard men. This is no place for, I cooked for railroad crews, Cora said. Her voice didn't rise. It just landed. 50 men, sometimes 60. I cooked outdoors in weather that would close this ranch down for a week. I managed supplies for month-long stretches with no resupply and no room for error. I've worked kitchens with less equipment than most women use to make Sunday breakfast, and I've never once left men hungry. Wesley looked at her. You said 60 seconds, he said. You've used about 45, son. Then I'll use the rest. She met his eyes without blinking. You've had no cook for at least 3 weeks. I can tell by looking at your men. She nodded once toward the bunkhouse where 2 of his hands were sitting on the step in the afternoon shade, looking like men who'd forgotten what a good meal felt like. You need someone who can do the job. I can do the job. Give me tonight 1 meal. If tomorrow morning you decide you made the wrong call, Nora and I will pack up and go, and you won't owe us anything but the supplies I used. The wind moved between them. Wesley looked at the little girl. She looked back at him, steady, unafraid, with her mother's same calm eyes. He looked back at Cora. The kitchen's in rough shape, he said. I've seen rough kitchens. Supplies are low. I work with what there is. Dinner's expected at 6. Then I'd better start now. She picked up one of her bags. Which way? The kitchen was worse than rough. Cora walked into it without changing her expression, which told Wesley more about her than anything she'd said in the yard. He'd half expected some reaction. A pause. A comment. At least a sharp intake of breath. The last man who'd seen that kitchen had used language that made Wesley ask him to step outside. Cora walked in, set her bag on the nearest clean surface, which was a small area near the back wall, and started moving. Not frantically. Deliberately. The way a skilled person moves when they've assessed the situation, and they already know what order things need to happen in. The stove, she said without turning around. Burns left hot. Noted. Where's the flour? Second shelf, if there's any left. She checked. There was enough. Not much, but enough. She checked the salt barrel, the lard, the beans, the remaining cured meat. She opened the back storage and looked at what was there with the focused expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head. Nora stood in the doorway, watching her mother work. Can I help? The little girl said. You can set yourself up in that corner, Cora said, and stay out of the way of the heat. Did you bring your book? Yes, Mama. Then sit and read. Wesley stood in the doorway watching all of this. He wasn't sure why he hadn't left yet. He had work. He had 16 hands to manage, and a fence line that needed 2 more hours before dark, and a supply ledger that wasn't going to reconcile itself. He stayed in that doorway for another full minute. You're going to be in the way, Cora said, without looking at him. He left. By 4 o'clock, something was happening in that kitchen that hadn't happened in 3 weeks. It smelled like food. Not the scorched edge, burned coffee, what is that smell, that Wesley's cooking had produced with dispiriting consistency. This was something else entirely. Something that reached out from the kitchen and moved through the main house and got into the yard. And Wesley watched his hands start drifting in from wherever they'd been. Not because anyone called them, but because their noses told them something had changed. Tom Briggs was the first one to actually say something. Tom was 43, had been on Ron Fork for 6 years, and had the permanent expression of a man who'd seen enough bad situations to expect the next one at any moment. He came in from the eastern pasture, stopped outside the kitchen door, and sniffed. What is that? He said. Dill was already there, sitting on the fence rail with his hat in his hands. The new cook. The woman? Tom's voice carried all the skepticism a man like Tom Briggs could pack into 2 words. The woman. Tom looked at the kitchen door. He looked back at Dill. He looked at the kitchen door again. She been in there long. Since about 2. Tom didn't say anything else. He just moved to the fence and sat down beside Dill, and both of them waited, which was about the highest compliment either of them was capable of offering at that stage. Inside the kitchen, Cora worked. She'd found a problem within the first 20 minutes. The main supply of salted pork had been improperly stored and a portion of it had turned. She cut away what she could save and set aside what she couldn't, and she recalculated without stopping. She had beans soaking. She had bread dough rising. She had a stew building low and slow on the left side of the stove, where the heat was right for it, and she'd found enough dried vegetables in a crate under the second shelf to make it into something actual, rather than something that merely pretended to be. At 4:30, Nora looked up from her book. "Mama, is it going to be good?" "It's going to be good," Cora said. "How do you know?" "Because I know what I'm doing. The little girl nodded and went back to her book satisfied. That was enough for her. It had always been enough for her, because her mother had never once told her something would be fine when it wasn't going to be fine. That trust had been built the hard way, one kept promise at a time, through things Cora had never told her daughter about, fully the months after her father died when money was a daily emergency. The winter when the only warm place they had was the kitchen of a boarding house where Cora worked double shifts, the lean times and the hard moves, and the way her mother always figured out what needed to be done and did it. Nora trusted her, completely, and Cora had earned every bit of it. At 5:50, Wesley came back to the kitchen door. He stopped. He didn't knock because it wasn't that kind of house. He just stood there. The table in the main room had been set, actually set with everything straight and in order plates placed properly, cups turned right side up. Somebody had wiped the table down. The bench along the wall had a cloth on it. He hadn't asked for any of that. He walked to the kitchen door and looked in. Cora was ladling stew into the serving pot. The bread was already out, 4 full loaves, golden brown, lined up on the sideboard. The coffee was on. The kitchen smelled like something that had been cooked by someone who understood the difference between heat and flavor. "You cleaned the table," he said. "Men eat better when they're not sitting in their own mess," she said. She didn't look up. "Do your hands eat together or in shifts?" "Together." "Good. Call them in 5 minutes." Wesley stood there for a moment longer. "You didn't ask me how I wanted the table set." She finally looked at him. "Would you have told me something different from what I did?" He thought about it. "No." "Then we save time." She turned back to the stove. 5 minutes, Mr. Tate." The 16 men of Ron Fork Ranch ate dinner at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening, and the room went quiet. In a way, it hadn't gone quiet in a very long time. Not the uncomfortable quiet of men who had nothing to say to each other. Not the exhausted quiet of men too tired to speak. This was the quiet of men who were paying attention to what was in front of them because what was in front of them deserved attention. The stew was rich. The bread was real, the kind of bread with a crust you had to work for, and an inside that was soft enough to make a man remember what good bread was supposed to feel like. The coffee was hot, and it tasted like coffee, which sounds like a low bar until you'd been drinking Wesley Tate's version for 3 weeks. Tom Briggs ate his first bowl without saying a word. He looked at the pot. He looked at Wesley. "There more," he said. "Ask the cook," Wesley said. Tom looked at Cora, who was standing to the side watching not anxiously, just watching the way a professional watches, noting what worked and what could be better next time. "Is there more?" Tom said. "There is," she said. "Help yourself." Tom helped himself. Then 6 other men helped themselves. The pot that Cora had calculated as exactly sufficient for 16 hungry ranch hands turned out to be exactly sufficient for 16 hungry ranch hands, who each had 2 full servings, and there was still bread left over. Wesley watched it all from the end of the table. He watched his men eat. He watched the tension in their shoulders drop, that specific tension that comes from weeks of not being properly fed from bodies running on not enough and making do. He watched Tom Briggs' skeptic of 12 years standing tear a piece of bread in half and eat it with the focused appreciation of a man experiencing something he hadn't expected. And he watched Cora Howard stand by the side of that room and not look proud, not look relieved, not look like any of the things a person looks like when they've just proven something. She looked like a professional who had done her job. That was all. "This is the best food I've had in," young Dill started. "Long time," Tom said, which from Tom Briggs was a cathedral of praise. Cora began clearing. Wesley stood up from the table. "Mrs. Howren." She looked at him across the room, both hands holding a stack of plates. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll need to look at the full supply list and talk to whoever does your ordering. There are gaps that need addressing before the end of the week." "We can discuss that in the morning." "Yes, we can." She carried the plates toward the kitchen. At the door, she stopped half-turned. "Tomorrow will be better than tonight." She said it the same way she'd said everything else, not as a boast, as a fact. Wesley stood in the emptying room and listened to the sound of his men talking. Actually talking, with something like energy. The kind of energy that comes back into men who've been properly fed. And he realized standing there in the quiet aftermath of the best meal Ron Fork Ranch had seen in months that he had made a decision without meaning to make one. He wasn't sending her away. The thought arrived not with relief or satisfaction, but with something sharper and less comfortable than either the recognition that a woman who'd been on his property for 4 hours had already changed something about it, and that he didn't entirely know what to do with that. He found her in the kitchen after the men had cleared out, washing up with the efficient economy of a woman who knew how to finish one task cleanly before the next one started. Nora was asleep in the corner, curled on the small bedroll that Cora had set up there at some point during the afternoon, without anyone noticing or being asked. Wesley leaned in the doorway. "We haven't discussed the arrangement," he said. "No. The room I have available is the one off the back of the storage. It's small." "Is it dry?" "Yes." "Then it's fine. There's a cot." "I'll need one for Nora, too. Or a pallet. She doesn't need much." Wesley nodded. "Pay is $20 a month. Meals are 3 times a day, plus whatever the hands need on early rides." Cora was quiet for a moment. She was still washing hands, moving steadily. "The pork in the back storage, almost a quarter of it has gone bad from improper keeping. You've been losing money on supplies for at least a month, probably longer. Whoever fills your orders may be sending you short weight." Wesley straightened up. "What makes you say that? The flour barrel is at a level that doesn't match the purchase date on the tag. Either your hands have been eating more flour than 16 men eat, which is physically possible, but unlikely given the state of the cooking, or the barrel wasn't full when it arrived." She set down the pot she was washing and turned to look at him. "I've seen it before. On the railroad. Suppliers who learned that camp cooks don't check weights because they're too busy to fight that battle." Wesley looked at her. "I check weights," she said simply. He stood there in the doorway for another long moment. Outside, the Texas night was settling in the particular dark of open ranch land, big and quiet, and smelling of grass and dust, and the dying edge of the day's heat. "You'll start checking the supply orders," he said. It wasn't a question. "If you want me to." "I do." She turned back to finish the washing. "Then we have an arrangement, Mr. Tate." "Wesley," he said. He wasn't sure why he said it. He almost didn't. She didn't look up. "Good night, Wesley." He walked back through the main house and out onto the porch, and stood there in the night air, thinking about a woman who didn't flinch, a child with serious eyes and 4 loaves of bread that had somehow changed the temperature of a room that had been cold for longer than 3 weeks. He thought about what she'd said. "Tomorrow will be better." He almost believed her. That was the part that kept him standing there in the dark, not the meal, not the efficiency, not the quiet authority with which she'd walked into a broken kitchen and made it work. It was the fact that for the first time in a long time, he was standing on his own porch at the end of a long day and thinking about tomorrow without dread. That was new. He didn't know yet what to do with new. But he didn't go inside right away. He stood there a while longer in the dark, and the wind listening to the ranch settle around him, the distant sound of the horses, the creak of the bunkhouse, and somewhere beneath it all, the faint last sounds of someone in his kitchen, finishing the work cleanly, the way she finished everything. He stood there until the kitchen light went out. Then he went inside. The next morning, Cora was up before the ranch. Not before the roosters, not before the horses, before the ranch itself, before the particular kind of awareness that settles over a working property when the first man rolls out of his bunk and the day begins its machinery. She was already in the kitchen when the sky was still the color of old iron fire, built water heating her hands, moving through the inventory she'd started cataloging in her head the night before. Nora slept on in the back room. Cora had checked on her twice already. She worked by feel, as much as by sight, in those first dark minutes, because she'd learned years ago that the first hour of a cook's day belongs to the kitchen, not to the light. You learned a kitchen in the dark. You learned where everything was by touch, by instinct, by the specific weight of a pot, and the sound of a particular cabinet door. By the time the sky started to gray up, Cora Howren already knew this kitchen better than the man who'd built it. She'd found 3 more problems overnight lying awake in the narrow back room with Nora breathing steadily beside her, turning the inventory over in her mind, the way another woman might turn over worry or longing. The coffee supply was 2 weeks short of what it should be for 16 men at 3 servings a day. The baking soda was nearly gone. And whoever had been storing the dried beans had been storing them wrong, which meant a portion of them were going to cook uneven no matter what she did. She made her notes on the small piece of paper she kept in her apron pocket. She would talk to Wesley about the supply order. She would do it directly and specifically because in her experience, the fastest way to lose a kitchen was to let its problems quietly compound until they became a crisis someone else had to solve. She wasn't interested in crises. She was interested in getting ahead of them. Sorry. The first hand came in at 5:40. It was Dill, which surprised her not at all. Dill had the eager energy of a young man who hadn't yet learned to ration it, and he came through the kitchen door with his hat already in his hand and his eyes wide at the smell of coffee and something baking. "Morning, Mrs. Howren." "Morning. Sit down. Coffee's ready." He sat. She poured. He wrapped both hands around the cup and closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, the specific gratitude of a man who'd been drinking bad coffee for weeks, and then opened them again and said, "You really cooked for railroad crews." "I did." "How many men?" 50 at the smallest camp, 63 at the largest." Dill thought about that. "That's a lot of mouths." "It is. How'd you end up out here?" He said it with the casual directness of the young, who haven't yet learned that some questions cost more to answer than others. Cora set a plate in front of him biscuits, the first batch of the morning hot from the oven. She'd made them with the economy of someone who knew how to stretch a short flour supply without anyone noticing the stretch. "I saw the notice," she said. Dill looked at her over his coffee cup. He was 22 years old, and he was not actually as unobservant as he sometimes pretended. "That's not all of it," he said. "No." Cora agreed. "But that's what I'm offering this morning." He nodded. He ate his biscuit. He had the good sense not to push. That was the moment Cora decided she could work with Dill. By 6:15, the room was full. 16 men eating breakfast with the specific focused energy of people who'd already remembered overnight in their sleep without meaning to that last night's dinner had been something worth showing up for. The conversation was louder than it had been in weeks. Tom Briggs was still. Tom Briggs, he sat at his usual place and ate without commentary, but even he was on his second biscuit before most men had finished their first. Wesley came in last. He always came in last. Cora had already intuited, not because he was late, but because he made the rounds of the property first. He came in knowing what the day was before he sat down to it. He sat. She poured his coffee without being asked, because she'd watched where he sat, and she was already moving. He looked up at her. "Supply list," she said. She set the paper beside his cup. I need these items by end of week or we'll start running short in ways that show up on the table. He picked up the paper. He read it. His expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes, the careful recalibration of a man who is updating his understanding of a situation. You found all of this last night. And this morning. The flour weight discrepancy. I want to be there when the next delivery comes in, she said. I want to weigh it myself. He looked up at her. Across the table, two of the hands were listening without appearing to listen. You think Harrywell's been cheating the weights? I think the numbers don't add up. That's all I know for certain. She met his eyes steadily. But in my experience, numbers that don't add up have a reason. Wesley folded the supply list and put it in his shirt pocket. I'll send the order today. You'll be there for the delivery. Thank you. She went back to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Tom Briggs say quietly to no one in particular, she found the flour problem. And Wesley, she found it last night. A pause. Then Tom. Huh. From Tom Briggs, that single syllable carried the weight of a full concession. Cora heard it from the kitchen and didn't let herself smile until she was facing the stove. The first real test came on Tuesday. Not the cooking, the kitchen was already running with the kind of smooth daily rhythm that Cora established fast and defended quietly like a foreman who never raised his voice but whose authority was never actually in question. The test came from a different direction entirely. His name was Carl Pruitt. He'd been with Ron Fork for 8 months, which made him neither the newest nor the most established of Wesley's hands, and he occupied that middle space with the particular restlessness of a man who hadn't decided yet whether he was staying or going. He was large, not fat, just large, with hands that looked like they'd been built for a harder job than ranch work, and he had a way of taking up more space than he needed physically and otherwise. He came into the kitchen at midday when Cora was alone. The hands were out on the range, Nora was at her lessons in the back room, and the kitchen was in the quiet, efficient middle of a workday that Cora was navigating exactly as she'd planned it. Carl leaned in the doorway. Need something? Cora said without turning around. Just looking. She kept working. There's nothing to look at in here. I'd say there is. He said it with the kind of tone that wasn't quite a comment on the food, and it landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. You know, we had a cook a couple years back. Man named Guthrie. He lasted 3 months. I know, Cora said. She turned from the stove and looked at him directly. I'm not Guthrie, Carl smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. No, you're something else, that's for certain. He pushed off the doorframe and took a step into the kitchen. Must be hard raising a child on the road, moving from place to place. No man to... Carl. Her voice was flat and clean. The kitchen is my workspace. I don't come to where you work and stand in your way. I'd appreciate the same. He stopped. Something shifted in his face. Not anger exactly, but the surprise of a man who'd expected a different response and didn't have a ready answer for the one he got. He was used to women who deflected, who made themselves smaller, who found a soft way around a hard moment. Cora Howren didn't deflect. She held his gaze without aggression, without apology, without anything that gave him a foothold. The noon meal will be ready in 40 minutes, she said. You're welcome to come back then. He left. Cora turned back to the stove. Her hands were completely steady. She noted that with a quiet internal satisfaction, not because she'd been frightened, but because she'd learned long ago that the first time you held your line was always the one that mattered most. Carl Pruitt would make a decision now about whether she was someone he could crowd. She'd given him his answer. What he did with it was his business. She stirred the pot and didn't think about him again until lunch. What she didn't know was that Dill had been crossing the yard at the wrong or right moment and had seen Carl coming out of the kitchen with a look on his face that Dill had seen before on other men, on other properties, and that he recognized for exactly what it was. Dill didn't say anything. He just went and found Tom Briggs. Tom listened to approximately 40 words before he stood up from what he was doing. You sure? Tom said. I'm sure what I saw. Tom didn't say anything else. He just walked. At lunch, 16 men sat down and Cora served. Carl Pruitt sat in his usual place, but Tom Briggs sat down directly across from him, not his usual place, and looked at him with the particular flat attention of a man communicating something that didn't need words. Carl picked up his fork and ate, and didn't look at the kitchen door once during the entire meal. Cora noticed Tom's changed seat. She noticed Carl's stillness. She didn't ask. She understood. After the meal, when the men had cleared out, she paused by the kitchen doorway, where Tom was still finishing his coffee. "Thank you," she said. Tom looked up. "For what?" She met his eyes. He nodded once and took another sip of coffee. "Food's better this week than last," he said, "and last night was already the best I've had in 2 years." It was the longest compliment Tom Briggs had offered in recent memory. Cora took it the way it was given, plainly, without ceremony. "Tomorrow's even better," she said. Tom almost smiled. Almost. The supply delivery came on Wednesday. Harrywell's wagon pulled up at mid-morning, driven by a man named Pete, who worked for the supply company and who had done this run to Ron Fork at least a dozen times. He came in easy, called out to Dill like they were old friends, started unloading with the practiced efficiency of a man who knew exactly how this was supposed to go. Cora was waiting at the storage door with Wesley's scale. Pete stopped unloading when he saw it. Just for half a second, a fraction of a pause that most people wouldn't have noticed. Cora noticed it. "Morning," she said pleasantly. "I'll be checking the weights today." Pete looked at her. He looked at the scale. He looked at Wesley, who was standing off to the side with his arms folded and his expression doing exactly nothing. "Don't usually do a weigh-in," Pete said. "We do now," Cora said. The first 3 items checked out. The fourth, a 50-pound flour sack, came in at 43 pounds and some change. Cora set it on the scale and looked at the number and then looked at Pete. Pete looked at the scale. He looked at the sack. He opened his mouth and then closed it again. "There might be some error in," he started. "There might be," Cora said agreeably. "Let's check the rest and see." The rest of the flour was short. 2 of the 3 salt deliveries were short. The dried pork, that was billed as 40 pounds, came in at 36. By the end of it, the numbers were sitting in the space between them like a verdict. Cora wrote the actual weights down beside the billed weights on the delivery sheet. Her handwriting was clear and exact. She handed the sheet to Wesley without a word. Wesley looked at it. He looked at Pete. Pete had stopped looking comfortable sometime around the second flour sack, and now he was looking at the ground with the expression of a man running internal calculations about how bad this was going to get. "You're going to take this back to Harrywell," Wesley said. His voice was level, quiet. The kind of quiet that's more serious than shouting. "You're going to show him these numbers, and you're going to tell him that the next delivery comes in at full weight or it doesn't come in at all. And you're going to tell him that I'm going back through 6 months of delivery records tonight, and if these numbers are what I think they are, we'll be having a different kind of conversation." Pete nodded. He loaded the short supplies back on the wagon. He drove away without saying goodbye to Dill. Wesley stood in the yard for a moment after the wagon disappeared. He had the look of a man recalculating not just the supply figures, but something larger. Something that had been happening around him that he hadn't fully seen. He turned to Cora. "How long did you know?" "I suspected Saturday night. I was certain by Sunday morning." "Why didn't you say it directly on Sunday?" "Because I didn't have numbers yet. Suspicion isn't proof." She folded the delivery sheet and held it out to him. "That's proof." He took it. He looked at it again. He looked at her. 6 months of deliveries. Probably more, but 6 months is where I'd start. He shook his head, not in disagreement, but in the specific way a man shakes his head when he's confronting something that's been happening right in front of him and he didn't catch it. "I should have." "You were managing 16 men and a working ranch," Cora said. "You were stretched too thin to watch every weight. That's not failure. That's arithmetic." She paused. It's why you needed someone whose full job is the kitchen." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It is." He went inside to start on the records. Cora went back to the kitchen to start on lunch. Sick. That afternoon, the ranch felt different. It was hard to name exactly what had changed. Not one big thing, but an accumulation of small things shifting into place the way a machine runs better when all its parts are properly aligned. The men had noticed the supply confrontation. Word moved fast on a working ranch, faster than any announcement Wesley could have made. By dinner, every hand on Ron Fork knew that the new cook had caught Harrowell's man short-waiting the deliveries and that Wesley Tate had sent the wagon back. "She weighed every single sack," Dill reported to the table at large with the enthusiastic detail of a man who'd been an eyewitness to something significant. "Every single one. And she wrote it all down right there standing in the yard. Didn't raise her voice once." Tom looked down the table at the kitchen doorway where Cora was carrying out the bread. "She raised it ever," he said. "Not that I've seen," Dill said. "More effective that way," Tom said. He said it like a man who'd learned that lesson himself a long time ago in harder circumstances than this. When Cora set the bread on the table, something happened that hadn't happened before. The men who could reach it, Dill first, then two others, automatically made space for her to move freely around the table, not with any announcement or ceremony, just with the instinctive adjustment of people who've recalibrated someone's position in their world. She wasn't invisible to them anymore. She wasn't the cook in the background. She was something else, something they were still figuring out the right word for, but that they'd already started to factor into how they moved around the room. Wesley at the head of the table watched it happen. He picked up his fork and said nothing. Thursday brought rain and trouble. The rain came in fast from the northwest in the mid-morning, the kind of spring rain that turned the ground soft and made the fence line work dangerous and sent the hands in early from the eastern pasture with mud on everything and tempers running short from a wet and frustrated morning. 12 men crowded into the main house, dripping loud arguing about the fence line and whose fault it was that the drainage on the east side had been left unaddressed since February. And the accumulated irritation of wet and cold and disrupted work turned the room sharp-edged within minutes. Cora came out of the kitchen and looked at 12 wet men filling the space with noise and argument and said nothing. She went back into the kitchen. 10 minutes later, she came out with coffee. Not one pot, 3 pots enough for every man to have a full cup immediately without waiting. She set them on the table and went back. 10 minutes after that, she came back with biscuits. Not the carefully rationed breakfast biscuits, these were larger, thicker, the kind that took real flour and real time, and that she had clearly decided were worth both. The argument didn't stop all at once. It slowed. Men picked up cups, men picked up biscuits. The voice that had been the loudest, a compact red-faced hand named Sterling, who'd been building toward something at high volume, ran out of steam somewhere around his second biscuit and looked almost puzzled by his own silence. "Where'd she get the flour for these?" one of the men asked. Dill shrugged. "She always has flour. We were low as of Sunday. She managed the order. She always manages." Wesley came in from the back of the house, having heard the noise and then gradually the lack of it. He stopped in the doorway and looked at 12 men sitting with coffee and biscuits in various states of finishing a sentence they'd started very loudly and then apparently decided wasn't worth completing. He looked at the kitchen door. He went to the kitchen. Cora was already starting the lunch preparations, moving around the space with the same deliberate efficiency he'd noticed from the first hour. Nothing wasted, nothing hurried, everything in the right order. "You did that on purpose," he said. "Did what?" "The coffee, the biscuits, the timing." She looked at him over her shoulder. Wet men in a small space argue because they're cold and their morning didn't go right. Hot food and coffee doesn't fix what went wrong, but it gives them something else to do with their hands, and men who are eating generally stop escalating. She turned back to the stove. "Railroad camps taught me that. It's not complicated." Wesley leaned against the wall and watched her work. Sterling was about to take a swing at someone. I know. That's why I came out with 3 pots instead of 1. He was quiet for a moment. Where did you find the flour? I reorganized the storage Sunday afternoon. There was a partial sack pushed behind the crate that nobody had accounted for. I set it aside for exactly this kind of situation. You planned for a rainy day. I always plan for a rainy day. She said it without any particular emphasis, but it landed with weight anyway. The simple statement of a woman for whom planning for the worst had never been theoretical. It had always been survival. Wesley looked at her. The kitchen was warm, not in temperature exactly, but in something else. The particular quality of a space where someone capable was fully in charge of it. Cora, he said. She turned fully to look at him. He almost never used her first name. She had noticed. The records I went through last night, he said. The short waits go back 9 months, maybe longer. What Harrywell's been taking from us. He stopped, ran a hand over the back of his neck. It's significant. I know, she said quietly. You knew it would be. I knew the pattern. Yes. He looked at her steadily. Why did you even care? You'd been here 2 days. It was an honest question. She took it seriously. Because the ranch was losing something it didn't know it was losing, she said, and I was standing close enough to see it. That's reason enough. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he straightened up off the wall. Lunch will be appreciated today, he said. Lunch will be ready at noon, she said. He went back out. The warmth of the kitchen stayed with him further down the hall than it had any logical reason to. The twist came at the end of the week. Friday evening after dinner, a rider came into the ranch yard at the kind of hour that riders arrived when what they were carrying was urgent. Cora heard the horse from the kitchen and heard Wesley go to the door, and then she heard a voice she didn't recognize. A man's voice, clipped and formal, in the way of someone delivering a message someone else had composed. She didn't listen. She finished the cleanup. She got Nora settled, but later, after the house was quiet, she was still in the kitchen doing the inventory. She did every Friday evening, her weekly reckoning the full count of what they had and what they needed and how the numbers sat against the week coming when she heard boots in the hall. Wesley appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked like a man who'd received news he was still organizing. Sit down, she said. She poured him coffee and set it on the table. He sat. He wrapped his hands around the cup the same way Dill had that first morning, and for a moment he just looked at the table. The rider was from Henderson County, he said. There's a land claim filed against the eastern quarter of the ranch. A man named Colburn says the original deed has an error in the boundary survey. Cora set down the inventory paper she was holding. Does it? I don't know yet. I've got to pull the original papers. His jaw was tight. If the claim has standing, if there's something wrong with the survey, that quarter includes the best water source on the property. Without it, he stopped. Without it, Ron Fork struggled. That was the end of that sentence, and they both knew it. Cora looked at him. Where are the original papers? Lockbox. In the office. Pull them tonight, she said. Don't wait until morning. Whatever's in those papers is better seen tonight than tomorrow. It's late. Wesley. She said his name with the same flat clarity she'd used on Carl Pruitt, and it had the same effect. It stopped him mid-sentence and made him hear what came after. Whatever is in those papers, you're better off knowing it now than lying awake wondering. Pull them tonight. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not gratitude exactly, but the specific look of a man who's just realized someone is actually in his corner. He got up. He went to the office. Cora stayed at the kitchen table with her inventory and her coffee, and the particular focused attention of a woman who had learned to sit with hard situations without running from them, and she waited for whatever the papers were going to say. Alt. He came back 40 minutes later. He sat back down across from her without preamble. He set the papers on the table. His face was unreadable in the way of a man who has just read something bad and has not yet decided what to do with it. There's an error, he said. In the original survey, The boundary marker on the northeast corner, the notation doesn't match the physical markers. It could be a drafting error. It could be something else. He stopped. Colburn's lawyers will use it. Cora looked at the papers. Can I? He pushed them across the table. She read carefully. She was not a lawyer. She had no legal training. But she was a woman who had navigated contracts and supply agreements and camp employment terms for 7 years alone. And she had learned to read a document the way a carpenter reads a joint looking for where it didn't fit properly, where something had been forced rather than built right. She read for a while. Wesley waited. The survey notation is wrong, she said finally. But look at this. She pointed to a line in the original deed. This is a reference to a physical landmark, a creek fork. If the creek fork is documented anywhere else, a county plat map, an earlier filing, anything, it anchors the boundary regardless of the survey notation error. She looked up. Do you have the county records, the original territorial filing from before the survey? Wesley stared at her. How do you know about county plats? Because when my husband died, she said evenly, the land we were farming had a disputed title, and I spent 4 months learning everything I could about how land claims work in this state before I understood that we had no case. She set the paper down. I lost that one, but I learned what matters. She held his gaze. The Creek Fork reference matters. If there's an earlier document that names it, your boundary holds. Wesley sat very still. I have the original territorial filing, he said slowly. From when my father first claimed this land. It's with the county recorder. I filed a copy when I took ownership. Then that's where you go, Cora said. Monday morning, first thing, before Colburn's lawyers have a chance to move on anything else. He looked at her across the table in the kitchen, in the late-night quiet of a working ranch that had just become complicated in a new and serious way, and something moved across his face that was not easy to name. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just surprise. It was the specific look of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just realized with a jolt that is equal parts relief and something more unsettling that there is someone else in the room who is strong enough to help him carry it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you should get some rest. It's late. I will, she said. She started gathering the papers back into their order. Cora. He waited until she looked up. Thank you. She looked at him steadily. It's your ranch, Wesley. I just cook here. He opened his mouth, closed it. She handed him the papers and stood up and went to check on Nora. Wesley sat at the kitchen table for another 10 minutes, in the quiet, with the papers in his hands, and the coffee going cold, and the sound of the ranch outside the horses, the wind, the wide Texas dark. And he thought about a woman who'd arrived 5 days ago with 2 bags and a child, and 60 seconds, and who had, in the course of 1 week, caught a thieving supplier, settled a room full of angry men with biscuits and timing, and just told him how to save the eastern quarter of his ranch. He thought about the way she'd said, "It's your ranch, Wesley. I just cook here." He thought about how completely he did not believe her. Wesley rode to the county recorder's office Monday morning before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. He didn't tell anyone he was going except Tom, who he left in charge with the same 2 words he always used, "you know," and Tom, who had been on Ron Fork long enough to understand what those words covered, nodded once and went back to work. Cora heard the horse leave. She was already in the kitchen. She didn't go to the window. She started breakfast and let the morning do what it was going to do, because she had learned long ago that worrying about things you couldn't act on was just energy spent on nothing. But she thought about those papers. She thought about the Creek Fork notation. She thought about the way Wesley had looked at her across the kitchen table Friday night, that specific look she hadn't let herself examine too closely, because there were categories of things she couldn't afford right now, and that look belonged to one of them. She cracked eggs into the pan and focused on breakfast. Dill came in at 6 with the others sat down, poured his own coffee, because he'd learned that Cora appreciated a man who didn't wait to be served when she was clearly managing 4 things at once, and said without preamble, "Where's Mr. Tate?" "County recorder," Tom said. The table went quiet in the particular way of men who understand that county recorders don't get visited before breakfast for ordinary reasons. "The land claim," Sterling said. He'd been less loud since the rainy Thursday, not because anyone had told him to be, but because something about the way the week had unfolded had recalibrated him quietly. "Not our business," Tom said. "It's all our business if the Eastern Quarter goes," said a man named Hugh who was 48 and had been at Ron Fork longer than anyone except Tom. Hugh didn't talk much, which meant when he did, people listened. "That's where the good water is. Ranch runs short without it." The table absorbed that. The men looked at their plates. Cora came out of the kitchen with the bread and set it down without comment, but she'd heard every word, and the men knew she'd heard it, and nobody pretended otherwise. "He'll handle it," Dill said with the confidence of the young. "He's handling it," Cora said quietly, and went back to the kitchen. It wasn't reassurance exactly. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same tone she used for everything level clear, carrying no more weight than it needed to, and no less. But something about it settled the table. Men picked up their bread. The conversation moved on. Hugh went back to eating. Tom looked at the kitchen door for a moment, and then looked back at his plate, and the expression on his face was the closest thing to relief that Tom Briggs's face was capable of producing. "Marteau." Wesley came back at mid-morning. Cora heard the horse and heard him come in through the back and go directly to the office, and she waited. She wasn't the kind of woman who ran to meet news. News came when it came. He appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later. He had a document in his hand. Not the original papers from Friday, but something else. Something older. "The territorial filing," he said. "The one my father made in 1861. He set it on the kitchen table. The creek fork is named, specifically, with measurements from 2 fixed points. He looked at her. "It predates the survey by 11 years. The survey notation error doesn't override it." Cora looked at the document. She didn't touch it. She just looked. "Colburn's claim doesn't hold," she said. "Not if my lawyer argues it right, and he will." Wesley's voice was controlled, but underneath it, something was moving, the specific release of pressure that a man carries when a threat he's been holding against the possibility of losing everything turns out to have an answer. "I need to send a letter to my lawyer today, and I need to get this filed with the county as a formal response to Colburn's claim before the end of the week." "Then do it today," Cora said. "Don't wait." He nodded. He picked up the document. He looked at her with something direct and unguarded for exactly 1 second before his expression settled back into its usual steadiness. "If you hadn't told me about the Creek Fork reference, you'd have found it," she said. "Maybe. Not by Monday morning." She turned back to the stove. "Lunch is at noon. You have time to write the letter." He almost said something else. She could feel it, the specific weight of words a man decides not to say because he doesn't yet have the right ones. Then he went to the office, and Cora stood at the stove and let out a breath she hadn't fully acknowledged she was holding. What happened next arrived not from outside the ranch, but from inside it, which was the kind of trouble that was always harder to manage. It started with Carl Pruitt. Carl had been quiet since the kitchen confrontation. Not apologetic, not reformed. Just quiet in the way of a man who'd been checked and was deciding what to do about it. Cora had watched him the way she watched everything, without apparent attention from the corner of her professional awareness, cataloging without reacting. On Tuesday afternoon, she found out what he'd been doing with his quiet. She overheard it because she was in the storage room doing inventory. A weekly task she did, without announcing. Which meant she was often in spaces people didn't expect her to occupy. And Carl was in the yard on the other side of the storage wall, talking to a hand named Roy, who'd only been at Ron Fork for 3 weeks. "She's got Tate wrapped around her finger," Carl said. "Man can't see what's right in front of him." "She caught the supply fraud," Roy said. He sounded uncertain, like a man being pushed toward a conclusion he hadn't reached himself. "She caught it because she was looking for a way to make herself useful, looking for a way to make herself permanent." Carl's voice had the edge of a man who'd constructed a story and was committed to it now. "Woman shows up with a child, no husband, nothing to her name. You think that's just about cooking? She's working an angle, same as any woman in that position would. Roy didn't answer. Tate's a fair man, Carl continued, but he's been alone a long time. He's not seeing this clearly. Cora stood in the storage room with a flour sack in her hands and let the words land without moving. She noted her own reaction with the careful detachment she'd learned to apply to things that wanted to make her angry. The heat that rose up through her chest. The precise, specific burn of being reduced to a calculation, an angle, a woman working a position instead of a person doing a job. She set the flour sack down. She finished the inventory. She did not go out into the yard. Tap-touch. She did, however, think very carefully about what to do. By the time dinner was on the table that evening, she'd decided. Not on confrontation. Confrontation with Carl would look like exactly what he'd claimed she was doing, working angles, making herself central. Not on telling Wesley that would make her appear to need his protection, which she didn't, and would put him in the position of managing his own hands on her behalf, which would cost him more than it cost Carl. What she decided was simpler than either of those things. She did her job. She did it so well and so consistently, and so without any visible interest in anything beyond the work itself, that the idea of her having an angle became progressively harder to maintain. Not because she argued against it. Because the evidence in front of anyone with eyes was a woman who got up before dawn and worked until after dark and asked for nothing except the materials she needed and the space to use them. You cannot argue against a fact that simply keeps happening. Wednesday brought its own crisis, separate from Carl Pruitt, and sharper. One of the hands, a man named Joe Adler, who was 34 and had never in his time at Ron Fork admitted to any physical complaint, came into breakfast moving wrong. Cora saw it in the first 30 seconds. The way he sat down, the way he held his left side. The careful arrangement of a man trying not to show that something hurt. She watched him eat. She watched him not eat much. She watched him push through 2 cups of coffee with the focused determination of a man trying to convince himself that forward momentum was the same as being all right. After breakfast, when the men were clearing out, she stopped him with nothing but his name. Joe. He turned. His face was doing the thing men's faces do when they've committed to pretending. Mrs. Howren. Sit back down. He hesitated. Sit down, she said, not unkindly. He sat. She came around the table and stood beside him and said quietly, Where does it hurt? It's nothing. Pulled something yesterday is all. Show me where. He looked at her. He looked at the door. He looked back at her and saw exactly what he always saw in her face. No judgment, no drama, just clear, practical attention, and he pointed to his lower left side. Cora put her hand there carefully. Not invasively, just enough. She felt the heat before he said anything. How long? She said. 2 days. Did you fall down? Fence post. Caught me on the side. She stepped back. You need to tell Wesley. It's fine, Joe. She kept her voice low and her tone even. That heat means something. I've seen it before at the camps. A man takes a hard hit to the side, thinks it's a bruise, doesn't say anything, and 3 days later, he can't stand up straight and we're 2 days from any doctor. She held his eyes. Tell Wesley today. Let him decide whether you work or rest. That's his call to make, not yours to make for him by staying quiet. Joe looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, not quite shame, but the close cousin of it. The feeling of having been seen past your own pretending. You're not going to let this go, he said. No. He sighed. He stood up carefully, which told her everything she needed to know about how much he was actually hurting. All right. She watched him go find Wesley. She went back to the kitchen and started the prep for lunch, and did not follow up because she trusted that once a man had been pointed in the right direction, he was capable of walking there himself. Wesley came to the kitchen an hour later. Joe Adler, he said. I know. You knew this morning. I suspected this morning. I was certain by the time he stood up. She kept working as she talked. He needs 2 days of light work, nothing that strains the left side. If the heat doesn't go down by Friday, get him to a doctor." Wesley was quiet for a moment. He said, "You told him to come to me. It's your ranch, your hands. My job is the kitchen." She glanced back at him. "But I'm in a position to notice things. It would be wasteful not to." He stood there in the doorway and watched her work and said nothing for a beat too long. "Carl Pruitt asked me yesterday," he said carefully, "whether I thought it was a problem you being involved in things outside the kitchen." Cora's hands didn't stop. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that the cook who catches a supply fraud keeps 16 men from tearing the house apart in a rainstorm and notices a hand hiding a side injury is involved in exactly the right things." He paused. "I also told him that if he had concerns about the ranch's management, he was welcome to bring them to me directly rather than carrying them around the yard." Cora set down the spoon she was holding. She turned and looked at him fully. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." He held her gaze. "I wanted to." She looked at him for one careful moment. Then she picked up the spoon and went back to work. "Joe should eat something light tonight. Broth if I have it. I'll make sure there's enough." Wesley recognized a redirect when he was handed one. He took it. "Thank you," he said. "Noon," she said. "Same as always." Thursday was the day Nora got sick. It happened the way childhood illness always happens, without warning, and at the worst possible time. Cora was in the middle of the noon meal preparation, hands deep in something she couldn't put down, when Nora appeared in the kitchen doorway, with the particular flat-eyed look of a child who has already been sick once and is about to be sick again. Cora got to her in time. Barely. She settled Nora in the back room, got water, checked the fever with the back of her hand. High but not dangerous, the specific temperature of a child who needs rest and fluids, and her mother nearby. She covered her brought water, stroked her hair once, and then stood up and looked at the door. Lunch. 12 hungry men in 40 minutes. She went back to the kitchen. She didn't slow down. She recalculated the timing, the things that needed her direct attention, versus the things she could set on the stove and trust. And she moved between the kitchen and the back room with the efficiency of a woman who had long since learned to split herself precisely across competing needs without losing track of either. It was Dill who noticed first. He came in early the way he sometimes did and found her moving between the kitchen and the hall at a pace that was faster than usual. "Something wrong," he said. "Nora's sick. Fever. She's resting." Dill put his hat on the peg. "What can I do?" She looked at him. He was 22, and he meant it. "The bread needs to come out of the oven in 8 minutes exactly," she said. "Don't let it go longer. Can you watch it?" "Yes." "Then watch it." He watched it. He got the bread out at exactly the right time. He set it to cool where she'd pointed. He stayed out of her way for the rest of the preparation because he was smart enough to know that what she needed was not company, but a functional pair of hands in the right place at the right time. Lunch was ready at noon. It was good. Not as elaborate as some days Cora had made smart choices about what to attempt under the circumstances, but good. Filling exactly what 16 working men needed at the middle of a workday. She served it and then went to check on Nora. Wesley was already there. She stopped in the doorway. He was sitting on the small chair beside Nora's cot. The chair that barely held him, too small for his frame set there with the particular careful awkwardness of a large man trying to occupy as little space as possible. Nora was looking up at him with feverish eyes and the loose attention of a sick child. He was talking to her quietly. "And the brown horse is named Butterscotch," he was saying, "which is a terrible name for a horse. But she came with it, and she's had it 12 years, so I don't see the point of changing it now." Nora almost smiled. "That's a funny name?" "It is. Maybe you can meet her when you're feeling better." Cora stood in the doorway without making a sound. Something happened in her chest. Not large, not dramatic. Just the quiet, specific shift of something that had been held carefully in one position for a long time, moving slightly inevitably towards something else. She had been careful. She had been so careful about everything about the distance she maintained about the line she kept between the job and anything beyond the job about not letting herself need things she couldn't afford to need. She had a daughter and no safety net and a position she'd held for 11 days, and she could not afford to be careless. But Wesley Tate was sitting in a too-small chair beside a sick little girl he had known for 11 days, talking about a horse named Butterscotch, and Cora Howren was standing in the doorway, being careless without meaning to. She stepped back before he saw her. She went back to the kitchen. She cleaned up from lunch with the focused, almost aggressive efficiency of a woman redirecting herself. Putting everything back in order. Everything in its place. She was still at it when Wesley appeared in the kitchen doorway. "She's sleeping," he said. "Thank you." Cora didn't turn around. "You didn't have to do that." She was awake and she looked scared. A pause. Kids that age, when they're sick and their mother's busy, they get scared. Cora's hands stopped for just a moment, then kept moving. "She doesn't usually." Maybe today she did. She turned then. He was leaning in the doorway, in the way he'd learned to lean in that specific spot, like a man who was not quite entering the kitchen, but who had claimed the doorway as a place he was allowed to be. "How did you know she was there?" Cora said. "Dill told me. He said you'd put Nora down sick and gone right back to cooking, and he looked like a man who thought someone ought to check on the situation." Cora looked at him steadily. "I had it managed. I know you did." He said it without any implication that she hadn't. "I just thought somebody ought to sit with her while you were working." His eyes were direct, and without anything complicated in them, just the simple statement of a man who had thought a child needed company and had provided it. "She told me about her father." The kitchen went very quiet. "Did she?" Cora said. Not a question. Just two words very carefully placed. "She said he died when she was 3. She said she doesn't remember him much, but she remembers he had big hands." Wesley paused. "She said her mother tells her good things about him." Cora nodded. "Once." "He was a good man," she said. "He was just unlucky." She paused. "We were unlucky together for a while, and then I was unlucky alone, and then I found a different way to look at it." "What way?" She met his eyes. "That luck is mostly what happens when you're not paying attention, and I pay attention." Wesley looked at her for a long moment across the kitchen. Outside, the afternoon was doing what Texas afternoons do, pressing down with heat and light that made everything feel more real and more immediate than it had any right to. "I know you do," he said quietly. He pushed off the doorframe. He was halfway down the hall when he stopped without turning around. "The Colburn response is filed," he said. "My lawyer sent confirmation this morning. Colburn's claim won't survive the territorial filing." Cora stood very still. "Good," she said. He walked on. She heard the back door close behind him. She stood in the kitchen for another moment alone, in the particular quiet of a space that had stopped feeling like a stranger's kitchen sometime in the last week and a half, without her quite giving it permission to. Nora recovered by Saturday, which was the fastest and most complete recovery Cora had ever seen attributed by Nora herself to the fact that Mr. Tate had told her about Butterscotch the horse and had promised she could meet her, and she had decided she needed to get well before he forgot the promise. "He won't forget," Cora said, braiding Nora's hair on Saturday morning. "How do you know?" "Because he's that kind of man." Nora considered this with the focused seriousness of a 6-year-old evaluating a statement about an adult. "Is he a good kind of man?" Cora kept braiding. Her hands moved with the automatic steadiness of long practice. "He's a fair kind of man," she said. "He works hard. He's honest. He looks after what's his." "Are we his?" Nora said. Cora's hands paused, just for one moment. "We're his employees," she said. "We work for him." "Oh." Nora thought about this. "Can we be both?" Cora tied off the braid. She turned Nora around and looked at her daughter's face. The serious eyes, the tilted head. the complete unself-conscious directness of a child who asked the questions that adults had learned to leave unasked. "Let's go introduce you to Butterscotch," Cora said. The day Carl Pruitt made his actual move came on a Sunday. Wesley was gone for the afternoon riding the far northern boundary with Tom, a 3-hour task that took them out of earshot and eyeline of the main house. Most of the other hands were occupied. The ranch had the particular spacious quiet of a Sunday afternoon. Carl found Cora in the storage room doing the weekly inventory. She heard him before he said anything. The specific weight of boots on the storage floor, the way he stopped just inside the door, rather than in the doorway, which was different from every other man who came to the storage room. All of whom stopped in the doorway because that was the natural stopping place, and Carl had chosen not to. She turned around. He had his arms crossed and his expression arranged into something that was trying to look reasonable. "I want to talk to you." "All right," she said. "You've made yourself useful here. I'll give you that." He said it like a concession extracted under duress. "But you need to understand something about how this place works." "Tell me." "Wesley Tate runs a ranch. He doesn't run a family operation. He doesn't need—" Carl paused, choosing words. "He doesn't need complications. He's got enough on his hands without managing a woman's situation on top of it." "He's not managing my situation," Cora said. "I manage my situation." "You've got a child on a working ranch." "I do." "That's a liability." "She's 6 years old, and she stays in the kitchen space or the back room, and she has never once interfered with a single man's work on this property." Cora kept her voice level. "Can you say the same about yourself?" Carl's jaw tightened. "You think you're protected here because Tate—" "I'm protected here," Cora said, "because I do my job. That's the only protection that matters. That's the only kind I want." She held his gaze without blinking. "Now, is there something you need from the storage room, or are we finished?" He stared at her. "We're not finished," he said, and his voice had dropped into something different now, not threatening exactly, but occupying the territory just before it. "I know what you're doing, and I know it's going to go wrong for you when Tate figures it out." "Figures what out?" she said. "That you're running a play. Women in your position always are." The storage room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a horse moved in the paddock. The afternoon sun came through the high, small window and laid itself across the floor between them. Cora looked at Carl Pruitt and felt something settle in her, not anger past anger, into the cleaner, harder territory that lives on the other side of it. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to hear it clearly." She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. "I have been cooking for difficult men in hard conditions since I was 22 years old. I have managed supplies and money and crises in places that would make this ranch look comfortable. I have raised a daughter alone on the road and kept her safe and fed and loved without a single person's help except my own." She paused. "I did not survive all of that to be undone by a man who is angry that I didn't flinch when he walked into my kitchen." Carl stared at her. "I don't have an angle," she said. "I have a job, and I do it. And if that frightens you, if the idea of a woman who is simply competent frightens you this much, then that is your problem to solve, not mine." She turned back to the inventory. After a moment, she heard him leave. She stood with her hand on the flour sack and let the adrenaline move through her and out the other side, the way she'd learned to do, feeling it fully, and then releasing it because holding it served nothing, and she had work to finish. She finished the inventory. She went back to the kitchen. She started dinner. That evening after dinner, Wesley found her on the small back step, the only time in the day she allowed herself to simply be still for a few minutes before the final kitchen cleanup. Nora was already asleep. The ranch was settling into its nighttime sounds. He sat beside her. Not close, just beside. They didn't talk for a while. The night did its particular Texas thing, big and dark, and full of the sounds of a working land settling into rest. "Carl Pruitt is leaving," Wesley said. Cora looked at him. I got back from the northern boundary, and Tom told me some things. His voice was even. I talked to Carl. He's leaving at the end of the week. You didn't have to do that. He created a problem, Wesley said simply. I solve problems on this ranch. That's my job. He paused. Same as you solve problems in that kitchen. We're not that different. She looked at him in the dark. You heard what happened in the storage room. Tom heard some of it. Dill filled in the rest. He was quiet for a moment. I should have handled Carl sooner. I saw the warning signs, and I let it sit. I handled it. I know you did. He turned and looked at her directly in the dark. That's what I mean, Cora. You handle everything, and I watch you handle everything, and I don't. He stopped. Restarted. I don't want you to think this ranch doesn't see that I don't see it. The night moved around them. The wind came and went. I see the ranch, she said quietly. I see what it could be. What could it be? He said, and there was something in the question that made it about more than the land. She looked out into the dark for a moment. Steady, she said finally. It could be steady. It's almost there. He was quiet for a long time. Almost, he agreed. And they sat there in the dark for a while longer, not touching, not saying anything more, while the ranch settled around them into the particular piece of a place that was slowly, carefully becoming something it had not quite been before. Carl Pruitt left on a Wednesday morning without ceremony. He loaded his gear before breakfast, which meant he missed the meal deliberately, which meant he knew that sitting at that table one last time would cost him something he wasn't willing to pay. Cora heard the sounds of a man departing the specific weight and rhythm of it, and she kept cooking. She didn't go to the window. She didn't change her pace. Dill came in looking like a man who wanted to say something about it. Don't, Tom said before Dill opened his mouth. Dill closed his mouth. He sat down. He ate. The table had 15 men instead of 16, and nobody mentioned it, which was its own kind of statement, the collective agreement of men who had made a judgment and were expressing it through the simple act of not marking the absence as a loss. Wesley came in last, same as always. He sat. He looked at the table, counted what was there, and picked up his fork. We'll need a replacement hand before the summer drive, he said to Tom. I'll put the word out, Tom said. That was the entirety of it. Carl Pruitt was gone from Ron Fork Ranch, and breakfast continued, and Cora brought out the second round of biscuits at exactly the right moment, and the morning moved on. And what nobody had anticipated, not Wesley, not Cora, not Tom, with his 12 years of ranch instinct, was that Carl Pruitt had made a stop on his way out of the county. They found out 4 days later on a Saturday, when a woman named Mrs. Adelaide Greer arrived at the ranch in a buggy driven by her son-in-law, who waited outside with the patient expression of a man who had learned that waiting outside was always the better option when Mrs. Greer had business to conduct. Adelaide Greer was 61 years old, the widow of a successful cattle buyer, and the closest thing Harding County had to a social authority. She was not unkind exactly. She was precise. She had opinions about how things ought to be done, and she had spent 4 decades refining those opinions into something with the weight and permanence of county law. Wesley met her on the porch. Cora, who was in the kitchen and could hear the yard through the back window, heard the greeting, the specific tone of Adelaide Greer's voice, which was the tone of a woman who had come on a mission she considered charitable. She came inside. Wesley brought her to the front room. Cora stayed in the kitchen and listened without trying not to. I'll be plain with you, Wesley, Mrs. Greer said, because I respect you, and I respected your father, and plain speech is the only kind worth having. I appreciate that, Wesley said. There is talk in town about the woman you've hired. A pause. About the arrangement. She's my cook, Wesley said. His voice was even. She cooks 3 meals a day for 16 men and manages my supplies. That's the arrangement. She lives on the property, in the back room off the storage, with her daughter. Wesley. Mrs. Greer's voice softened into something that was almost gentle. I know you're a man of integrity, but you are a single man, and she is a single woman, and people People are talking, Wesley said, because a man who left my employ in poor standing made sure they would. A pause. Carl Pruitt came to you, Wesley said. Not a question. He came to the ladies' auxiliary meeting on Thursday evening. Mrs. Greer said, with the careful precision of a woman not quite admitting to being influenced by the source. He expressed concerns. Carl Pruitt expressed concerns because I sent him packing, Wesley said. And he decided the best way to settle that score was to drag a decent woman's name through town gossip. His voice had stayed level throughout, but there was something underneath it now, the specific heat of a man who is angry on someone else's behalf. Mrs. Greer. Cora Howren is a professional. She is the best cook and kitchen manager I have ever employed, and in 3 weeks, she has saved this ranch money, prevented a supply fraud, and managed a medical situation that could have become serious. She has conducted herself with complete propriety at all times. I would put my hand to that in writing. Silence. I'm sure she's very capable, Mrs. Greer said carefully. She is, Wesley said. Exceptionally. Another pause. Then, could I meet her? Cora heard that. She untied her apron, smoothed her hair with both hands, the way she'd smoothed it 10,000 times in 10,000 difficult moments, not primping, just settling herself, and walked out of the kitchen into the front room. Mrs. Adelaide Greer looked at her. Cora looked back. She did not perform. She did not arrange her face into anything it wasn't already doing. She stood in the doorway of the front room of Ron Fork Ranch and looked at the woman who had come to assess her, and she let herself be assessed with the complete composure of someone who knew precisely what she was and wasn't afraid of it being seen. Mrs. Greer, she said. I'm Cora Howren. Can I bring you coffee? Mrs. Greer blinked. Whatever she'd been expecting, it apparently wasn't this. Yes. Thank you. Cora brought coffee. She brought it properly cup and saucer, which she had because she'd found them in the back of the kitchen cabinet 3 weeks ago, and washed them carefully and put them in their right place for exactly this kind of occasion. She set it down. She sat in the chair across from Mrs. Greer, not invited, and not waiting to be, because she was 31 years old, and this was her professional character being questioned, and she would face it directly. I understand there's been talk, she said. Mrs. Greer looked at her cup. There has been. About the propriety of my being here. Yes, Mrs. Greer. Cora folded her hands in her lap. I'm a widow. I have a 6-year-old daughter. I took the only position available to me that paid enough to keep us and offered stable housing. I have worked every day of my 3 weeks here with complete professionalism, and I have done nothing that any reasonable person could point to as improper. She held the older woman's eyes. I know where the talk came from, and I know why it was started. And I think you're a woman smart enough to know the difference between genuine concern and a dismissed man's revenge. Mrs. Greer was very quiet. Then she picked up her coffee and drank it and set it down and said, This is excellent coffee. Thank you. The last cook here, Guthrie, made terrible coffee. I know. I found his method written on the inside of the cabinet door. I changed it the first morning. Something shifted in Adelaide Greer's face. Not softening exactly, more like a recalibration. The specific adjustment of a woman who prides herself on reading people and has just updated her reading. You have a daughter, she said. Nora, she's 6. She's well behaved, and she stays within her space, and she doesn't interfere with the work. Where is she now? Reading. In the back room. She reads for 2 hours every afternoon. I taught her myself. Mrs. Greer looked at her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. No, Cora said. I rarely am. The older woman almost smiled. Almost. The talk will settle, she said. It generally does when there's nothing to feed it. She stood. Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Howren. Thank you for coming directly, Cora said. I prefer direct. So do I, said Mrs. Greer, and she sounded like she meant it, and she sounded like she hadn't met many people lately who did. Wesley walked Mrs. Greer to her buggy. He came back inside, and found Cora already back in the kitchen, moving through the afternoon prep with the steady efficiency that had become in 3 weeks as natural a feature of his house as the walls. He stood in the doorway. "You didn't tell me she asked to meet you," he said. "You were handling her. I let you. And then you walked in anyway. She asked to meet me." Cora glanced at him. "I wasn't going to make you speak for me when I was 20 feet away." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you say to her?" "The truth." "All of it. Enough of it." She kept working. "She's not a bad woman. She was brought bad information by a man with a grudge, and she came to verify it herself rather than just repeating it. That's actually the right instinct." Wesley considered that. "You're defending her. I'm being fair to her. There's a difference." She looked at him over her shoulder. "She'll go back to town and the talk will quiet down. She's not the kind of woman who spreads a story she's no longer sure of." He nodded slowly. He started to turn away and then stopped. "Cora." She waited. "I want you to know what was said about you in town, about your character. I don't—" He stopped, finding the right words with the carefulness of a man who doesn't speak imprecisely about things that matter. "It made me angry. On your behalf. I want you to know that." She was very still for a moment. "I know," she said quietly. "Good," he said, and walked away. She stood at the stove and let herself feel what that was. The specific unfamiliar warmth of having someone in her corner who hadn't been asked to be, who'd chosen it without calculation or condition. She let herself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she went back to work. The twist that arrived the following Tuesday was the one nobody had seen coming, because it didn't come from outside Ron Fork, and it didn't come from a dismissed hand's revenge. It came from the supply company. Harrywell himself came to the ranch. Not Pete. Not another driver. Marcus Harrywell in person, in a good coat, driving his own buggy, which told you he'd decided this required his direct management. He was 55, heavy through the shoulders, with the kind of practiced pleasantness that men develop when they've spent 30 years selling things to people who didn't always want to buy. He shook Wesley's hand warmly and said all the right things about the misunderstanding. With the weights and oversight. A new man on the route, completely unacceptable. He understood Wesley's frustration, and he had with him a credit document that represented the short weight difference across the past 6 months. Wesley looked at the credit document. Cora was not in the room. She was in the kitchen. She heard everything. The credit document was for $83. Cora stopped moving. She did the arithmetic in her head, the arithmetic she'd done carefully the week before, across 6 months of delivery records that Wesley had let her review. The short weight total she had calculated came to $141. The difference was $58. She wiped her hands on her apron. She walked into the front room. Wesley looked at her when she entered. Harrywell looked at her with the practiced pleasantness dimming slightly at the edges like a lamp turned down. "Mrs. Howard," Wesley said. His voice told her he'd been waiting for her. "Mr. Harrywell," she said. She sat down again, not invited, not waiting, and she set her own paper on the table between them. Her calculation paper. The one with every delivery date, every build weight, every actual weight she'd recorded or estimated from the remaining stock levels. Harrywell looked at it. "My calculation," she said, "is $141 across the period from last September to the day I arrived. I'm happy to walk you through the numbers line by line." Harrywell's pleasantness went through several adjustments in rapid succession. "Ma'am, with respect, you weren't present for the majority of—" "I wasn't present," she said, "but the delivery records were, and the supply stock levels when I arrived told a clear story about what had been delivered versus what the records showed." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not accusing you of intention, Mr. Harrywell. I'm showing you arithmetic." He looked at the paper for a long moment. He looked at Wesley. Wesley was watching him with an expression that was doing exactly nothing, which from Wesley Tate was the most serious expression he owned. Harrywell picked up the paper. He read it slowly. He set it back down. 120, he said. 141, Cora said. 130. 141. She didn't blink. "Mr. Harrowell, these are not my opinions. They are your delivery records against your weights. I can give you the same paper with each line sourced to a specific delivery date. Would that be helpful?" A silence. 135, Harrowell said, and his voice had lost most of its warmth. 141, Cora said for the fourth time, with the same tone she'd used every time flat, certain, carrying not an ounce of aggression and not an ounce of give. Wesley said nothing. He was watching Harrowell with the patient attention of a man who has decided to let someone else win the room and is comfortable with that decision. Harrowell looked at the paper one more time. "Fine," he said. 141. He rewrote the credit document at the table. He handed it to Wesley. He stood up and picked up his coat with the carefully assembled dignity of a man who has just lost an argument to a cook and is going to spend the drive home deciding how to feel about that. He left. Wesley looked at the new credit document. He looked at Cora. 141, he said. "It was 141, she said simply. He looked at her for a long moment, with that expression she'd been carefully not examining for 3 weeks. The one that wasn't gratitude and wasn't admiration exactly, but lived somewhere in the territory between them, and a third thing she didn't have a word for. "Cora," he said. "The credit will cover 2 months of full supplies," she said before he could say whatever he was going to say. "I'd like to find a second supplier to price against Harrowell going forward. Keeps everyone honest." He sat back in his chair. "All right. I'll write the inquiry letters this week." "All right." She stood up. She took her paper back. "Lunch in an hour," she said, and went back to the kitchen. The men found out about the Harrowell meeting, the same way they found out about everything through Dill, who had been in the yard during the buggy's arrival and departure, and had a gift for assembling a complete picture from partial information and an audience willing to fill in the gaps. By dinner, the story had achieved a kind of mythology at the table. Harrowell had come with a false credit. The cook had produced a paper with every number correct, and Harrowell had left with his coat not quite as straight as it had been when he arrived. "She didn't raise her voice," Dill reported, with the awe of a man describing a natural phenomenon. "Not once. He tried to argue 3 separate times, and she just said the same number each time." "What number?" Hugh said. $141. Hugh whistled low. "That's real money." "Yes," Tom said. He looked at the kitchen door with an expression that had traveled a significant distance from the skepticism of a man who'd first heard there was a woman at the ranch with a child. It had arrived somewhere that looked a great deal like respect, the specific earned kind that Tom Briggs did not distribute lightly. "It is." Cora served dinner and said nothing about Harrowell because it was done and done, didn't need discussing. But when she set Tom's plate in front of him and he said very quietly, "Good work today, Mrs. Howrin," she nodded once and said, "Thank you, Tom," and that was sufficient for both of them. What broke open between Wesley and Cora that week didn't announce itself. It arrived the way most true things arrive, sideways in the middle of something else entirely. It was Thursday evening late. The ranch was quiet. Nora was asleep. Cora was doing the Friday inventory a day early because Saturday's delivery needed to be planned around the new credit, and she was in the kitchen with the lamp on and the paper in front of her when Wesley came in from the porch. He'd been out there a while. She'd heard the door close behind him an hour ago, and the occasional sound of boots on the boards, and then nothing for a long stretch. He came in and sat at the table without being invited because he'd stopped waiting to be invited to his own kitchen table sometime in the second week, and Cora had stopped noting it as a choice and started accepting it as a fact sometime in the third. He poured himself the last of the evening coffee. He looked at the inventory paper she was working on. He didn't offer to help because he'd learned that Cora doing the inventory was not a task that benefited from company, only from the absence of interference. They sat in the easy quiet of people who have learned each other's silences. After a while, he said, "My father built this ranch." She looked up. "He came out from Georgia in 1857. He had $40 and a horse and a very clear idea of what he wanted. Wesley turned the coffee cup in his hands. He wasn't a warm man. He was a fair man. Those are different things. Yes, Cora said. They are. He ran this place the way he ran everything, precisely, without waste, without sentiment. He paused. He built something real. I respect that. But, Cora said. He looked at her. There's a but. There's always a but when a man talks about his father that way. A half-second of something moved across his face, surprise or the recognition of being seen clearly. But he ran it like a machine, efficient, correct, and it never felt like... He stopped. Home, Cora said. He was quiet. Yes, he said. She looked at him across the table in the lamplit kitchen of a house that had been a machine for a long time, and that she'd been watching become something else. One meal at a time. One quietly solved problem at a time. And she understood something she hadn't fully articulated before. Is that what you want? She said. For it to feel like home. He looked at the table. I didn't used to think about it. And now? He looked up at her. And now I think about it. The lamp between them made the kitchen feel smaller than it was, the specific intimacy of late-night light that closes the world down to whatever's in its radius. Cora felt the pull of the moment, the exact nature and direction of it, with complete clarity. She also felt the weight of everything she couldn't afford to be careless with. Nora asleep in the back room. The position she'd held for 3 weeks. The life she'd rebuilt from loss once already, with no margin for another collapse. It takes time, she said. Making something feel like home. It doesn't happen because you want it to. How does it happen? He said. By building it, she said. Slowly, by each person in it doing their part consistently for long enough that the consistency itself becomes the thing. She paused. The ranch is closer to it than you think. The men feel it. The difference from a month ago. It's you, he said quietly. That difference is you. She shook her head. It's not, she said. It's what happens when a kitchen runs right. When men are fed properly. When the supply numbers are honest and someone catches the problems before they compound. She held his eyes. Any good cook would have done this. No. He said it flatly with certainty. They wouldn't, not like this. She looked at him for a moment. Wesley, she said carefully. I need this position to remain what it is. I need clarity about what this is. He held her gaze. He understood her completely. She could see that he did. I know, he said. He said it without any attempt to argue past it. I'm not asking for anything to be different than it is right now. Good. I just want you to know. He stopped, started again. I want you to know that what you've built here matters. That it doesn't go unnoticed. That I notice it. He looked at her steadily. That's all. Cora sat with that for a moment. Let it land without deflecting it. All right, she said. He nodded. He finished his coffee. He stood up. He was at the door when she said, Your father built something real. You're right about that. He stopped. But what you're building is better, because you're building it for people to live in, not just to run. He stood with his back to her for a moment. Good night, Cora, he said. Good night, Wesley. He went down the hall. She heard the door close. She sat in the lamplit kitchen for a little while, with the inventory paper in front of her, and the coffee going cold, and something warm sitting in her chest that she was not going to examine too closely, not yet, not until she was sure she could afford to. She went back to the inventory, but she was smiling just faintly at the numbers. The crisis arrived on Saturday morning with no warning whatsoever. Cora was in the middle of breakfast preparation when Hugh came through the back door, moving faster than Hugh ever moved. Hugh, who was 48 and had the deliberate pace of a man who'd decided that urgency was mostly a young man's error. He was urgent now. Mrs. Howerin, where's Wesley? North fence, what's happened? Ryder came in, from Henderson County. Hugh's face had the look of a man delivering something he wished he wasn't carrying. Colburn's not dropping the land claim. Cora's hand stopped. His lawyer filed a counter-argument yesterday. He's claiming the territorial document is fraudulent, saying it was backdated. Hugh looked at her directly. He's got a witness, someone who says they saw the filing date altered in the county records. The kitchen was very still. Who's the witness? Cora said. Hugh hesitated. A man named Gerald Pruitt. Cora closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. Go get Wesley, she said. Now, ride fast. Hugh went. Cora turned back to the stove and turned the heat down on everything that needed it, because there were things burning that couldn't be left. And then she stood for a moment with her hands on the edge of the stove and thought very clearly and very quickly about what she knew. Gerald Pruitt. The name wasn't Carl, but the name was Pruitt, and in Cora's experience, coincidences of that particular shape were rarely coincidences. Carl Pruitt had left Ron Fork 2 weeks ago. Carl Pruitt had gone to the ladies' auxiliary to damage her reputation. And now a man named Pruitt was a witness in a fraudulent land claim filed against the ranch that Carl had just left. She thought about the Colburn claim. She thought about the territorial filing, the one she'd told Wesley to retrieve, the one that had settled the claim the first time. She thought about what it would take to call that document fraudulent. You would need a witness. You would need someone with enough apparent connection to the records to make the testimony credible. And you would need the claim to succeed before anyone had time to find the counter-evidence. She went to the office. She found the copy of the territorial filing. She read it again the third time she'd read it, because the first 2 times had been about understanding it, and this time was about looking for something specific. She found it in 7 minutes. At the bottom of the document, beneath the county recorder's signature, was a secondary notation, the kind of administrative marking that clerks add to filings to track their own records. A date code, a clerk's initials. The specific notation format that had been standardized by the Texas Territorial Office in 1858, and that she knew the format of because she had spent 4 months learning land record formats in a different county, in a different desperate situation 8 years ago. The notation format was correct for 1861. Precisely specifically correct using the exact abbreviation system that had been in use from 1858 to 1863, and then changed. Anyone claiming this document was backdated to 1861 from a later date would have needed to know that specific abbreviation system well enough to replicate it perfectly. A forger working backward from a later date would almost certainly have gotten it wrong. She sat down at Wesley's desk with a piece of paper and wrote out exactly what she'd found in clear numbered points with the specific notations cited and the dates of the formatting standard referenced. She wrote it the way she wrote everything, precisely without speculation, with only what she could actually demonstrate from the document itself. She was on her 3rd page when she heard the horse in the yard. Wesley came in fast. Hugh had ridden hard. He came to the office doorway and stopped when he saw her at his desk with papers spread in front of her. His face had the look of a man who'd received bad news on horseback and was still moving at that speed internally. Hugh told you, he said. Sit down, she said. He sat. She turned the papers toward him. The territorial filing isn't fraudulent. I can prove it from the document itself. She pointed to the notation at the bottom. This formatting system. It's correct for 1861, specifically correct in a way that only someone who knew the 1858 to 1863 territorial office standards would know. A backdated forgery from a later date would use the post-1863 format. It doesn't. She looked at him. Your lawyer needs to know this, today, before Colburn's attorney gets any further with the witness. Wesley looked at the paper. He looked at her. How do you know the territorial office formatting standards? He said. She met his eyes. Because I've needed to know things like this before. And when I need to know something, I learn it. She kept her voice steady and her eyes direct. Wesley, send the rider today. Your lawyer needs these notes this afternoon. He picked up the papers. He read them. He read them again. He stood up. "I'll write the letter now," he said. "I'll finish breakfast," she said. He stopped in the doorway. He turned around. He looked at her with an expression that had given up entirely on being unreadable. It was open direct, carrying everything it actually contained without the careful management he usually applied to his face. "Cora," he said. She waited. "I don't have the words yet," he said, "for what you are to this place. But I'm going to find them." She looked at him for a moment in the quiet of his office, with the territorial filing between them and the smell of breakfast still coming from the kitchen, and Nora's voice drifting faintly from the back room where she'd woken up and was talking to herself the way she did in the mornings. "Write the letter," Cora said. He wrote the letter. The writer left within the hour, and Cora went back to the kitchen and finished breakfast and served 16 men at 7:30. And nobody at that table knew that in the previous 40 minutes she had very likely saved the ranch a second time. Quietly, precisely, without raising her voice, from the same office where Wesley Tate's father had once run this property like a machine and never thought to make it feel like home. The writer came back from Wesley's lawyer on Monday afternoon, and he didn't come back alone. He came back with a letter and a name, and the name was the thing that changed everything, not because it was unexpected, but because it confirmed what Cora had suspected from the moment Hugh had said Gerald Pruitt in the kitchen doorway on Saturday morning. Wesley read the letter in the office. Cora was in the kitchen. She heard him come to the doorway, and she turned around before he said anything, because she'd learned to read his footsteps by now, the weight and pace of them, what they meant before he opened his mouth. His face told her the letter was serious. "Gerald Pruitt is Carl's brother," he said. "I thought so," she said. "You thought so Saturday. I thought it was likely Saturday." She kept her voice even. "What does your lawyer say?" Wesley looked at the letter. "He says the notation argument is strong. He's taking it to the county judge this week with an affidavit from a records clerk who can confirm the 1858 formatting standard." He paused. "He also says Colburn's attorney reached out this morning. They're reconsidering the witness." Cora set down the spoon she was holding. "Reconsidering how?" "Gerald Pruitt's testimony has a problem. He claims he saw the filing date altered in the county records office. But the county records office logs every visitor, every single one, name and date going back to 1869. Wesley looked up. "Gerald Pruitt has never signed that log." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "He was never there," Cora said. "He was never there." Wesley folded the letter. "He lied, and Colburn's attorney knows it now because my lawyer asked the question this morning and got the answer in 2 hours." Cora absorbed this. "So, Colburn loses the witness," she said. "And without the witness, the fraudulent document claim collapses. Without that claim, the original territorial filing stands. Without—" He stopped. He looked at her directly. "Without what you found Saturday morning, my lawyer wouldn't have known to ask about the visitor log. He wouldn't have known to dig into the witness's credibility specifically around physical access to the records." She held his gaze steadily. "He would have found it. Maybe. In a week. Maybe 2. He set the letter on the counter. Colburn's attorney was moving fast. A week might have been enough time to do damage that was harder to undo. The words sat between them. Cora let them sit. She didn't minimize them, and she didn't amplify them. She just let the truth of the situation be what it was. "When will it be settled?" she said. "My lawyer thinks by end of week. Colburn will drop it. He's not a fool. He'll see that the witness is finished and the document is solid, and he'll cut his losses." Wesley paused. "The land is safe." Cora nodded. She picked up her spoon. "Good," she said. "Dinner's at 6. Wesley stood in the doorway for a moment longer. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at her, at the complete steady normalcy of a woman who had just helped save his ranch for the second time in a month and was now focused on dinner timing, and whatever he'd been about to say rearranged itself into something he wasn't ready to say yet. He went back to the office. She stirred the pot and let herself breathe. The confirmation came on Thursday. Wesley got word through his lawyer by mid-morning. Colburn had withdrawn the claim. The eastern quarter was secure. The water source was Ron Forks now, and going forward documented and clean and challenged and survived. He told the men at lunch. He said it plainly the way he said everything. No drama, no celebration performance, just the fact delivered to the people who needed to know it. The table reacted the way men who work land react when land is secured with the specific exhale of people who understand concretely what losing it would have meant. Sterling said something loud. Dill looked like he might say too much and caught Tom's eye and said nothing instead. Hugh nodded once the way Hugh marked every significant moment with one nod that carried the weight of everything he didn't put into words. Tom looked at Cora. She was refilling coffee. She met Tom's eyes and he held them for a moment and then lifted his cup, which from Tom Briggs was a toast. She poured. After lunch, when the men were filing out, Dill stopped beside her with the bright-eyed energy of someone who had been waiting for a moment to say something. "You know it was you," he said. "Both times. The creek fork and the notation thing. You, Dill." She looked at him. He stopped. "It was Wesley's ranch and Wesley's lawyer and Wesley's father's filing from 1861, she said. "I read a document, that's all." Dill looked at her with the expression of a young man who knows he is being offered a version of events that is technically true and substantially incomplete, and who is smart enough to know he can't argue with it. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He went out. She went back to the kitchen, and the afternoon continued on normal and steady, the way Ron Fork afternoons had begun to run with a rhythm that felt for the first time like something that would hold. What happened on Friday evening, nobody planned, which was why it worked. It started because Nora asked about butterscotch. She'd been patient about it 6 years old, and patient which told you everything about the kind of child Cora had raised. But it had been 2 weeks since Wesley had made the promise during her fever, and she had been waiting with the focused determination of a child who takes promises seriously and expects adults to take them seriously too. She found Wesley on the porch after dinner. Cora heard it from the kitchen. Nora's voice very polite, very direct. "Mr. Tate, you said I could meet butterscotch." A pause. "I did say that," Wesley said. "I'm better now. I've been better for 10 days. Another pause. Cora could hear the specific quality of silence that meant Wesley Tate was trying not to smile. "You kept count." "Yes." "All right," he said. "Come on then." Cora heard small boots on the porch boards, and then Wesley's heavier step, and then the yard, and she stood in the kitchen for a moment with a dish in her hand, and listened to her daughter's voice, high and clear, asking questions about the horse, and Wesley's voice, answering them with a patience and specificity that no one had asked him for and that he was offering anyway. She set the dish down. She went to the kitchen door and leaned in it and watched. Nora was standing at the paddock fence with Wesley beside her, and Butterscotch, who was a brown mare of middling appearance and apparently excellent temperament, had come to the fence with the amiable curiosity of a horse who had decided this small human was interesting. Nora had her hand out flat, the way you offer a hand to a horse, which she had clearly learned somewhere, and practiced because she did it correctly and without hesitation. Butterscotch sniffed, then accepted. Nora's face did the thing faces do when an animal chooses you. That specific, unguarded joy that children haven't yet learned to contain or manage. She laughed a short, bright sound and looked up at Wesley. "She likes me," Nora said. "She does," Wesley agreed. "How can you tell?" She didn't move away. He said it seriously with the specific respect for the question that Nora had learned to expect from him in the 2 weeks since the fever. He never talked down to her, never softened information into something easier and less true. Butterscotch moves away from people she doesn't want to be around. She didn't move. Nora considered this. She moved toward me a little. She did. Is that better than just not moving away? That's considerably better, Wesley said. Nora stroked the horse's nose with the careful reverence of a child touching something important. And Wesley stood beside her with his hands on the fence rail and didn't say anything else. and Cora stood in the kitchen doorway watching the two of them in the evening light, and felt something move through her that was too large and too clear to redirect this time. She had been careful. She had been so careful for so long about exactly this, about the specific danger of wanting something she couldn't afford to lose. She'd built her life on the discipline of knowing what she had, protecting it precisely, not reaching beyond what was secure. But she was standing in the doorway of a kitchen that had become hers in every practical sense, watching her daughter laugh at a paddock fence, beside a man who had kept his promise about a horse to a sick 6-year-old, and the discipline she'd built her life on was not quite enough to hold the line against that. She went back inside. She finished cleaning up. She was professional and focused, and completely in control of everything except the fact that her hands were not entirely steady.
Tut.
Wesley came back inside at dusk, Nora skipping ahead of him through the back door and going directly to the kitchen.
Mama, she let me touch her face.
I saw, Cora said. Did you watch? Some of it. Nora looked at her with the precise attention of a child taking inventory of her mother's expression. She'd been doing this since she was 3, reading Cora's face the way Cora read supply ledgers, looking for what was actually there beneath what was presented. Whatever she saw made her go quiet for a moment in that particular way. Not sad, not worried, just processing. I like it here, Mama, she said. The words landed softly and with full weight. I know you do, sweetheart, Cora said. Do you? Cora looked at her daughter. 6 years old with serious eyes and her father's dark hair, and a question that cut straight to the center of the thing Cora had been not examining for a month. Get washed up for bed, Cora said. Nora went. Cora stood at the kitchen counter and pressed both hands flat against the wood and breathed. Wesley was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come back inside. She didn't turn around. She talks to you, she said. She does, he said. She doesn't talk to most adults. Not easily. Not like that. I know, he said. I noticed. She turned around. He was leaning in the doorway in his way, the specific lean of a man who had claimed this doorway as his, and who was no longer pretending that his presence in this kitchen at the end of the day was only about coffee or logistics or the next morning's supply question. What are you doing, Wesley? She said. Her voice was direct, not unkind, just direct because she was out of the energy required to go around the edge of things. He held her eyes. I think you know what I'm doing. I need you to say it. He pushed off the doorframe. He came into the kitchen, actually into it, not staying at the threshold, and he stopped close enough that the space between them was intentional. Chosen. A statement. I'm not going to pretend I don't see what I see, he said. I've been trying to for a month, and it doesn't work, and I'm not going to keep doing it. He looked at her steadily. You came here with 2 bags and 60 seconds, and in 30 days you've changed what this place is. Not just the kitchen, not just the food, the whole thing. He paused. The men are different. The supply chain is honest. The ranch has what it needed to fight off a land claim that would have cost us everything. And He stopped. I come home at the end of a day, and the house is warm, and my daughter Nora is laughing at the paddock fence, and I don't know when this happened, but somewhere in the last month this stopped feeling like a machine I operate and started feeling like something I live in. Cora was very still. She's not your daughter, she said. No, he said. Not yet. The kitchen went completely quiet. Cora looked at him. She looked at him with everything she actually had. Not the professional assessment, not the careful management, not the discipline she'd used to keep the line between what this was and what it wasn't. She looked at him the way she hadn't let herself look at him in 30 days. Wesley, she said carefully, I came here with nothing. I have a child who depends entirely on me. I cannot, she stopped. I cannot be careless with this. I know, he said. I'm not asking for careless. He held her gaze without flinching. I'm asking for honest, that's all. Just honest. She looked at him for a long moment. Honest, she said. Yes, she breathed. Honest as I stopped wanting to leave somewhere in the second week. His expression shifted. Something opened in it. Honest is, she continued, that I've been very careful not to want things I can't afford. And this, she gestured a small movement that somehow encompassed the kitchen and the ranch, and him and the paddock outside where her daughter had just laughed at a brown mare named Butterscotch. This is the most dangerous thing I've let myself be close to in 8 years. Dangerous how? He said. Because I could lose it, she said. Because it matters. Because Nora is already... She stopped herself. Already what? Already attached, she said quietly. To this place. To... She didn't finish. He was quiet for a moment. What if I told you, he said, that I don't intend for you to lose it? Intentions aren't guarantees. No. He agreed. They're not. He took one more step, and now the space between them was very small and entirely deliberate. But I'm a man who does what he says, Cora. You've been here 30 days. You know that. She had been here 30 days. She did know that. I know that, she said. Then let me say this clearly. His voice was steady and low, and carrying every word with the careful weight of a man who means to be held to what he says. I want you here, not as a cook, not as an employee. I want you here because this place makes sense with you in it, in a way it hasn't made sense in a long time. And I want Nora to grow up knowing what Butterscotch's face feels like. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just asking you to know that this is what I mean when I come to this doorway at the end of the day. Cora stood in her kitchen. Because it was her kitchen, had been her kitchen in every real sense for a month, and looked at Wesley Tate and felt the discipline she'd built her survival on coexist for the first time with something that didn't feel like its opposite. It felt like its completion. All right, she said. All right, you understand, he said. Or all right, something else. She almost smiled. All right, I'm not going anywhere. Something happened in his face that she had never seen there before, a specific release, quiet and deep, like a man who has been holding his breath for longer than he knew and has just been told he can stop. He nodded once. Good, he said. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for anything more than what she'd offered. He just stood in her kitchen for one more moment, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and then he stepped back. I'll let you finish up, he said. Wesley, he stopped. She looked at him. I'm glad you put that notice up, she said. In front of Calloway's store. He looked at her for a long moment. So am I, he said. More than you know. He went down the hall. She heard the porch door, and then the specific quiet of a man standing outside in the evening air. And she knew from 30 days of learning his sounds and what they meant that he was standing out there not with dread, but with something else entirely. She finished cleaning the kitchen. She checked on Nora, already asleep, one hand curled near her face. Her breathing, the slow, deep breathing of a child who is completely safe and knows it. Cora stood in the doorway of the back room and watched her daughter sleep, and let herself feel it fully, without the careful management, without the discipline that kept feelings at a size she could afford. She felt it all. Then she went to bed. The week that followed built itself differently than any week before it. Not dramatically, not with announcement or ceremony, but with the specific quality of things shifting from one arrangement into another, the way ice becomes water, not at a single moment, but across a threshold that you cross before you see it. Wesley started having coffee in the kitchen in the mornings, not just passing through. Sitting. He had things to say about the day-ahead fence line work, the new hand he'd found to replace Carl, the supply order that Cora had restructured around the second supplier she'd brought in. And he said them to her directly at the table, the way a man talks to someone whose opinion on those things he trusts. She gave her opinion. He listened. Sometimes he adjusted. Sometimes he pushed back. She pushed back on the pushback, when she thought she was right, which was more often than she'd let herself be right in previous positions, because this was a kitchen and a supply chain she'd built from scratch, and she knew the numbers better than anyone. He respected that. Consistently without making a performance of it. Tom Briggs noticed. Tom noticed everything, which was why Wesley valued him. But Tom was also a man who understood that some things were observed and not commented upon, and he observed the change in the kitchen's morning tone and said nothing about it except to do his coffee cup thing at Cora one morning. The same lift he'd offered the day the Colburn claim was dropped, and she understood it as the endorsement it was. Dill noticed and told Hugh about it, and Hugh said, "About time," with the flat certainty of a man stating something obvious, and Dill said, "You knew." And Hugh said, "I've been watching people longer than you've been alive, son." And that was the end of that conversation. Nora visited Butterscotch every evening. She had developed a system. She brought a piece of bread from the kitchen, which Cora measured out precisely, and Nora carried in her apron pocket, and she offered it at the fence, and then spent 20 minutes in conversation with the horse that was entirely one-sided, and apparently entirely satisfying to both parties. Wesley started coming to the fence too. Not every evening. Enough evenings that Nora began to expect him, and on the evenings when ranch work kept him away, she noted his absence with the specific accounting of a child who has decided someone is supposed to be present and is keeping track. "He's fixing the north fence," Cora told her one evening. "How long does that take?" "Depends on how broken it is." Nora thought about this. "Is it very broken?" "Probably medium broken." Nora nodded solemnly. "So tomorrow." "Probably tomorrow." He came to the fence the next evening. Nora handed him the bread first, her portion, which she had been dividing in two for the last 3 days, without telling anyone, and he took it without comment, and offered it to Butterscotch. And the three of them stood at the fence in the evening, quiet, and Cora watched from the kitchen doorway, and understood that something was being built at that fence line that had nothing to do with the land dispute, and everything to do with why a place becomes a home.
Gentleman.
The evening that settled, everything arrived on a Thursday, 5 weeks after Cora had stepped off the road with 2 bags and 60 seconds. She was doing the weekly inventory. Her Friday ritual moved to Thursday this week, because the Saturday delivery was coming early, when she found a discrepancy in the numbers. Not a supply discrepancy, a wage discrepancy. She looked at the household ledger that Wesley had given her access to when she'd taken over the supply management, and she looked at the column for the cook's position, and she looked at the number there, and then she looked at it again. The number was $40 a month. He had said 20. She sat with the ledger open for a moment. She read the entry date. It was 3 weeks ago, amended quietly with no announcement. He had simply changed the number and said nothing. She found Wesley on the porch. He was looking out at the dark the way he looked out at the dark on evenings when he was thinking rather than resting. She sat beside him. She held the ledger. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You found it," he said. "I do the ledger every week," she said. "You knew I'd find it." "Yes." "You changed it 3 weeks ago, after the Harrywell meeting," he said. "After you sat across from that man and went through every line of 6 months of delivery records and didn't move a single dollar." He held her gaze. $20 was the market rate for a cook. What you do is not the market rate for a cook. She looked at the ledger. "Wesley, you didn't ask me." "No," he said. "I didn't." "You should have asked me." "Would you have said yes?" She paused. "Probably not." "I know," he said. "That's why I didn't ask." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the steady directness that she had learned was the most honest thing about him. He never looked away from a thing he'd decided to stand behind. "That's not how things are supposed to work," she said. "Maybe not," he said. "But it's what's right. And I do what's right even when it's not how things are supposed to work." He paused. "You saved this ranch twice. You feed 16 men 3 times a day, and you managed the supplies, and you caught the fraud, and you found the notation, and you sat at that table and got Harrywell's arithmetic correct when he came in here with a false credit. He kept his eyes on hers. $20, Cora. She didn't have an answer for that. Not because she had no words, but because the words she had were too large and too close, and she wasn't ready to hand them over yet. "You're infuriating," she said. "I know," he said. "You can't just change the ledger without—" "I can," he said, "because it's my ledger. But I should have told you. You're right about that." He didn't flinch from the correction. "I should have told you." She looked at him in the dark for a moment. "All right," she said. "All right, it stays." "All right, it stays." She closed the ledger. "And next time you tell me." "Next time I tell you," he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. The ranch was quiet around them, the horses, the wind, the specific dark of Texas land at the end of a day. The bunkhouse light was on. Somewhere inside, she could hear the faint sound of men's voices, low and comfortable, the sound of people settled. "Wesley," she said. "Yes. Stop calling yourself just a cook," he said before she could say anything else. He said it with the careful emphasis of a man quoting something back deliberately. "I'm sorry, I couldn't wait. I've been waiting to say that for 2 weeks." She looked at him. Something happened in her face that she didn't stop. She didn't manage it or contain it or redirect it into something more professional. She just let it be what it was, the specific, unguarded expression of a woman who has held herself together for a very long time, and has just been told precisely and clearly that she doesn't have to hold quite so hard anymore. "I am what you hired me to be," she said, and her voice was softer than usual. He turned on the step, so he was facing her fully, and he looked at her with everything his face contained when he stopped managing it. "No," he said. "You are what this place was missing." The wind moved. The horses shifted in the paddock. The bunkhouse light held steady. Nora was asleep in the back room with her hand near her face and her breathing slow and complete. The kitchen behind them was clean and warm, and held the particular quality of a space that has been worked in by someone who cares about it, not just a room anymore, but a place with a person's shape in it. Cora looked at Wesley Tate on the porch of Ron Fork Ranch and felt the last careful distance she'd kept between herself and this close entirely. She did not reach for him. Not yet. That was not the moment for it, and she knew the difference. But she held his gaze steady and unguarded, and fully present, and what passed between them in that moment on that porch was as clear and binding as anything written in a ledger or filed in a county records office. "All right," she said. Her voice was quiet and final, and not at all uncertain. "Then stay what you are." "I will," he said. "If you stay what you are." She nodded once. They sat on the porch in the dark for a long time after that, not touching, not speaking, not needing to, while the ranch settled around them into the stillness of a place that has found what it was built for. And in the morning, Cora Howard would get up before the ranch and build the fire and start the coffee and begin another day in the kitchen of Ron Fork, not because she had nowhere else to go, not because she needed the position, not because a notice on a post outside Calloway's store had brought her to the only door that was open. She would get up because this was her kitchen in her home, on a ranch that had needed her, and that she had chosen fully and clearly with her eyes open and her hands steady, and her daughter sleeping safe in the room down the hall. That was not luck. That was not arrangement. That was two people, each broken in their own careful way, deciding that what they could build together was worth more than the safety of building nothing at all, and then building it one meal at a time, one solved problem at a time, one kept promise at a time, until the thing they'd built was solid enough to live inside. Ron Fork Ranch had a home at last. And Cora Howard had finally deliberately, without apology, with every piece of herself accounted for, chosen to be in it.